Hello and welcome to Critical Dragon, where I talk about art in film, television, and in books. And today I am talking about Curse of the Mistwraith and Deadhouse Gates, which seems like an incongruous sort of combination, but it's to do with a question or comment that had been raised on one book and another comment about a different aspect of the other book, and yet at heart they both have exactly the same root issue, and that is a reader not understanding why the characters don't see things the way that they do. And the characters are doing dumb things and they're acting in a dumb way. And all of this could have been avoided if only the characters had done this thing. And there are three major reading principles that apply here. Wolfgang Iser's, I previously had called him Wolfgang Iser. I've been corrected. His surname is pronounced Iser. Wolfgang Iser's gap theory, which is the gap between character knowledge and reader knowledge. And we'll talk about that in a second. The second aspect is retrospective understanding. We're all aware of that old idiom. Hindsight is 2020. Perspective in a novel plays into this an awful lot. And the third aspect is linked to both of those, but it's thinking about character knowledge and character motivation at the time and not assuming that our way of thinking is how they think. So it's placing yourself in the character's position and understanding the diegesis, the story world, the narrative from their perspective with their knowledge at the time. Those three principles all sort of come together to explain why, quite often in novels, we have moments where we go, oh, but if they'd just done this, none of this would have been avoided. Why didn't they just get on the eagles and have the eagles take them to Mount Doom and they could have avoided all of this? And it's this desire to have simple solutions. And then we get frustrated because this whole story is happening and it could have just been avoided if people had only done the thing that we know. Let's take an example from the real world before I delve into some minor spoilers of both Deadhouse Gates and Curse of the Mistwraith. World War II. Well, if people had only just, seen the problem that the Nazis raised before they started World War II, all of that could have been avoided. Yes, but at the time, people didn't see that. Historical perspective, looking in hindsight, we can see all those moments that led to the rise of the Nazi Party. We can see those moments that led to Hitler gaining this power. We can see all of those moments where people made mistakes, where people made the wrong decision, where people didn't take something seriously, where people bought into a lie, where people swallowed the propaganda. We can see all of those moments. And we, sitting here smugly in the future, are going, well, I would never have fallen for that. To which I would say, really, look around at how we consume news media. Look around at how we consume clickbait titles and articles and how people prey on our desire for sensationalist and simplistic answers for things. This is part and parcel of the human condition. We are easy to fool. We are easy to manipulate in general. Some of us slightly harder to manipulate in some ways and easier in others. There's a broad group of people. But what it comes down to is perspective, knowledge, and understanding. And in both the Deadhouse Gates example and in the Curse of the Mistwraith example, I think a lot of those factors come into play. So minor spoilers for Deadhouse Gates. In Deadhouse Gates, Bowden does not reveal to Felisin that he is there to protect her. And this reader was really frustrated and really annoyed. But why didn't he just tell her? And I have seen this comment come up multiple times in the last 15 years. People seem to hearten, to get this idea that if Bowden had just trusted her and given her this information, then none of these bad things would have happened. And you go, maybe. It's not a given. Let's play out the scenario. Bowden in the slave chain tells Felisin that he's there to protect her. They're surrounded by other people in the slave chain. One of them overhears them, and in order to try and broker their release, yells out to Tavor, I know that you've put someone in place to protect your sister. Release me or I'm going to tell people. Felisin hears about this because Tavor is surrounded by claw assassins. Tavor gets killed, Felisin gets killed, the person that yells out gets killed, Bowden gets killed. Congratulations, that turned out to be a fail. Okay, well, what if he waited until they were on the ship? So they're on the ship, they're in a slave hold, chained up to all of these other people who are right next to them. And again, Bowden decides to tell Felisin, a 15-year-old girl who is a noble, and he doesn't know, doesn't trust, has no reason to know or trust. He's going to tell her this secret that could get Tavor killed, get him killed, get her killed. He's going to tell her and trust that she's going to keep her mouth shut. And that no one in the slave hold, even though they're all next to each other, are going to overhear. Okay, so let's say he does that. And Felisin, in a fit of pique, when someone does something mean, says, well, I'll get Bowden to beat you up. He's here to protect me, and he's been assigned by my sister. And lo and behold, they all get killed. So there's another reason why it didn't happen then. So then they arrive at the slave camp. And one of the very first things that happens is Felisin attaches herself to the head slave and does drugs. Right. So half the time she's out of her mind. Why would I ever tell her a secret? Because she could blab it at an inopportune moment and get Tavor killed, get herself killed, get me killed. So you can understand Bowden being reticent to tell Felisin this plan, because if it all goes off without a hitch, they're going to arrive in the slave pit. He'll take a couple of days, get things organized, and then they'll break out. There's no need to tell her. Unfortunately, an entire uprising happens on the continent, which means none of the things are in place for Bowden to get them out and to be able to escape. All of the plans have gone awry because an uprising happened. And before anyone says, oh, well, Tavor should have known that the uprising happened, how many people the day before the Arab Spring knew that the Arab Spring was going to happen the next day? No one. People might have thought that it could happen. People might have said, well, tensions are rising, but you don't know when something is going to happen in the future, not with 100% certainty, and certainly not on a global scale in a world where you don't have mass communications, satellite telemetry, instantaneous communication, spy networks everywhere that can relay information back, all instantaneously, and you have a whole team of people processing all of this information to give you the highlights. The Malazan world doesn't have that. And yet somehow people expect characters to have this omniscient perspective. And this is what we talk about in terms of Iser's gap theory. Iser postulates and argues that there is a gap between what a reader knows and what the characters know. We are in possession of a lot of information that the characters are not. Obviously, characters also have information that we don't have. But we have an overview of what's going on. We know what is going on inside Felisin's mind because we're following her perspective. Bowden doesn't have that information. He doesn't. So he doesn't know how Felisin is feeling. He can only judge Felisin's actions, how she treats other people, what she does, and make his own judgment about that. We're also not treated to Bowden's interiority. We don't know what he is thinking, what his justifications are, the sort of background that he has. But we do find out that he is a covert operative, a spy and assassin. He is brutal. He is pragmatic. He is secretive. His Assassin's Guild, his organization, has been outlawed under pain of death. Therefore, you don't go around bragging about it. You don't reveal who other members are. You keep everything covert. So for the reader, we know what Felisin is going through. We understand Felisin's perspective. Bowden doesn't. We don't know what Bowden is going through. We don't know what Bowden knows. And we don't know how he feels about these things because we're not given that perspective. There is a gap of knowledge. Also, as readers, we know how it all turns out. We know what happens. We see all of these different interactions. We see what's going on. Bowden doesn't have access to that information. He doesn't know how it's all going to turn out. He doesn't know how, if he does one thing now, that will affect the outcome. That is not within Bowden's purview, but we as readers know that because we have hindsight. Not only do we have better information, but we can also see how all of these things play out. But if we are in the moment with Bowden and we ask ourselves, in that public line at the very beginning of Deadhouse Gates, would we honestly, as covert operatives trying to maintain a cover, reveal who we are to a flighty 15-year-old girl that we have never met before, but we've been told to secretly protect? No, it's far too public. Would we do it in a hold where everyone is jammed together and there is no privacy? No, there's a chance that people could overhear, particularly when the stakes are so severe. Would we do it as soon as we get to the camp? Well, by this stage, we've now seen what Felisin has been doing, and we cannot trust her because who knows what she is saying to these sailors when she goes off with them. And the thing is, as a reader, we understand why Felisin acts this way. But as a character, Bowden does not have access to that information. So why should he trust her, particularly when he thinks everything's going to plan, I don't need to tell her anything because we'll get out of this soon. And then when it all goes to hell, what is the point in telling Felisin at that point? By this stage, she is addicted to drugs. She is sleeping with all of these different people and acting in a way that you wouldn't necessarily trust her with covert information because we see that she is yelling at them and criticizing them and putting them down and trying to throw barbs at them. Why would you trust her with information that could get you instantly killed? That is not a situation built on trust. And so from Bowden's perspective, he has no reason ever to trust Felisin. And that's what makes his journey and what he does and his realization at the end of that journey when he is dying and lying in her lap. That's what gives that realization, that moment, so much resonance and impact. So from a story point of view, we needed all of those things in order to have that moment. If you had just told her at the beginning, it wouldn't have had that. It wouldn't have worked the same way. She wouldn't have acted the same way. And we can regret that things did not play out a different way. But to say that, oh, well, he should have just done this. No, there is no psychologically real way that makes sense. So to move on to the same thing that happened with the Curse of the Mistwraith. Someone in the comments of a recent video was very annoyed that how could these people side with the child murderers, and oh, it's so clear that all of this is they're the evil side. And again, the same principles apply. Firstly, we have knowledge that they do not. We have specifically been told by the framing narrative that this is not the story as it is traditionally recounted. This is something that these historians in the future have put together. So we're getting a perspective on the story that other people don't get. All perspectives have bias. Therefore, we're seeing it from a very particular slant. So again, there is a gap between what characters know and what readers know. We have far more information about what is happening than the characters do. It's not even close. Secondly, they're not thinking about it in terms of the rules of the world, how the world functions. Again, this battle that they are referring to, where these horrible things take place, if you're one of the townspeople, your perception of these clansmen, these barbarians, these savages who keep attacking the caravans that are bringing you food and goods and services, these are evil people. You're already predisposed to dislike them. There's an official headhunters section of society that this is an acceptable profession to go into because these clanspeople are basically animals. There's already a belief that these people are not human. They have been othered. And therefore, if someone comes back and says, oh, we had this battle and we killed all of these people, the townspeople are immediately going to go, yay, this is great. This is a fantastic thing. We killed the bad guys. The third thing is they were objecting to some of the war crimes committed by the headhunters and the soldiers in the field. Yes, because those soldiers are going to come back and brag to all the townspeople, this is exactly what we did. No, of course they don't say that. They don't tell those stories. And if one of the clanspeople who they think of as animals came back and said, this is what your side did, they go, that's just lies. You're trying to slander us. You're trying to make us look bad to justify your own position. Look at the framing of that entire conflict. In order to protect this town, we are going to invade the clan lands and kill all the clanspeople in defense. That framing is used all the time. In order to defend our country, we're going to invade this other country. We buy into that propaganda because we're on that side. But think about it from the other country's perspective. Hang on a sec. We're in our country. We're nowhere near your country. We're not going into your country. Why are you invading us? Oh, well, we don't like you. That is part of what is going on. So in hindsight, and with the perspective of the view that a reader has of all of this information, we make judgments about the people involved, but we're not thinking about it from the position of a townsperson who is already prejudiced against the clanspeople, who already thinks of all of these clan members as being barbarians and animalistic and evil, and is already prejudiced against them. And the fact that when the soldiers come back and go, it was a hard fought battle, we won, but we lost all of these things. And you go, oh, I feel bad for my husband, my brother, my father, my son, who was out there fighting the evil and fell in battle. There isn't a questioning of how they did it. The soldiers aren't revealing their evil tactics because what they did, they felt was justified. And this is such an important aspect of this story. And so these townspeople do not have real-time information about what went on in the battlefield. They don't even have second-hand information about what went on in the battlefield. None of that is given to them. And even if it was, they're already prejudiced against that information and are going to view it in the way of, well, this was justice. This was punishing the evil. Of course they deserve to suffer before they died because there's already a prejudice and bias there. So before anyone goes, oh, well, it's just stupid because people blah, blah, blah. Again, think of World War II. This is not a new concept. This is something that is highly realistic. This is something that makes perfect sense when you consider the psychology of the characters, their limited access to information, the fact that they have a cultural bias and perspective on the other side, and the fact that people are not going to share the crimes that they committed with their loved ones. And so because of all of that, the propaganda builds up, the cult builds up, the beliefs build up. People self-rationalize. They go, we are justified in doing these things because the other side are evil. We can commit war crimes because the other side are evil. This is such a common trait about us justifying our own behavior because we see it as justified, as rational. We've created a whole chain of logic of why we're allowed to do something. But as readers, we are witnessing this and we see how this is not justice. This is not right. This is terrible. And that's the point, to be able to place yourself in the subjective perspective of one of these people who thinks they are doing the right thing, and in doing that are actually committing horrible acts. It's not saying that those acts are justified. It's a way of exploring how people can end up doing that. And that is one of the most wonderful things about fiction, about fantasy, about the wars of light and shadow. It's showing us these things, and it's showing how normal people can buy into an element of propaganda, can buy into and believe a totally outrageous and unrealistic perception of the world because it has been built up incrementally over time. It has latched on to a minor bias or a perception that they had and built on it and built on it until their entire perception of reality is skewed and they can no longer see the truth. So while I sympathize with readers who feel frustrated about this, I would say try to think about it in terms of the difference between what a reader knows and what the characters know. Try to think about it in the moment that characters are making these decisions, and think about the setting that they are in, what is going on, how they feel about the other people. Think about the levels of technology and access to information that these characters have. Try to imagine yourself in that world, and try not to have that smug belief that, yes, well, if I was in Nazi Germany, I would have totally stood up against them because I'm great. Because look at the world around us. People believe all sorts of things and act in all sorts of ways that they believe are fully justified, that are fully rational, that are fully just. And from the other side, we can look at that and say, you're a monster for doing that. That is the lesson from fiction. And I can understand why people get frustrated, because they want a better outcome. They want a more just outcome. But this ability to be flexible in how we approach information, in understanding information from different sides, in understanding how that information is being relayed, the bias implicit in it, that is such an important tool of critical thinking. I was watching P.L. Stewart's channel the other day, and he was talking about The Way of the Dan by Philip Chase. And in it, he mentioned how in the prologue, and yeah, this is spoiling part of the prologue for The Way of the Dan, the three priests are murdered. And you go, not from the point of view of the people that did it. They weren't murdered. They were punished and executed. From the side that the priests were on, they were murdered. Murder is a very specific word that has the connotation of being illegal, not being justified. Execution, while we may disagree with it, while we might think it's morally reprehensible, we can say is not necessarily not justified. That depending on the weight of the narrative, the perspective of the narrative, the bias that the narrative is communicating, murder is an evaluation. And when people refer to those priests being murdered, they are taking the side saying what happened to them was wrong. But if we said that they were executed or the crowd did something, then we're being less judgmental and we're weighing what they did to the crowd against the crowd's reaction. And it's very simple things like this, looking at the words, looking at exactly what is being said, because, and again, it goes back to the prose matters. How things are described matters. And how we unknowingly can parrot or reiterate and make normal. We can normalize very specific viewpoints and judgments without realizing it, because we're not thinking about the words that we use to describe the thing. And yet those words quite often come laden with judgment. So all of these factors play into how we understand texts, how we balance character actions, and whether or not we think that character actions are psychologically real. And quite often, in a lot of the writing that I admire, the character actions make perfect sense. They are psychologically real. They are genuine reactions. And it could be that the character has made a mistake. Maybe they should have done that. Maybe it would have worked out okay. But generally, I can understand why a character acted the way that they did. And I might disagree with them. I might say, well, in that situation, I might have risked it. But I understand it's a judgment call. And characters can make mistakes. Characters can misjudge things. And that's part and parcel of fiction. It's part and parcel of the power of storytelling. It's to play out a what if scenario. If this decision is made, what happens next? What are the ramifications? And that's what plays out. And if we can't imagine how these things play out, particularly when it comes to the War of Light and Shadows, the reader thought it was ludicrous that people wouldn't see it the way that they did. And I think primarily because they weren't considering the fact that those townspeople did not have access to that information. So being able to understand the privileged position a reader is in with the wealth of knowledge we have, as Iser points out, we have access to all of this. The characters don't. We have access, direct access sometimes, to people's minds, their judgments, what they're thinking, what they're doing, why they're doing it. Characters don't. We live in a world where we have mass communication, instantaneous communication, satellite telemetry, spies everywhere. Like, that's the world that we live in. That's not the world that they live in. And even in our world, miscommunication happens. Bad judgments happen. People believe propaganda. People justify and rationalize the most abhorrent acts. And they don't see the simple basic logic because from their perspective, it isn't. And again, that's not to justify those things. It's to try and understand why it happens. And that's what we're seeing play out in a lot of these stories. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I will see you in the next one.